All right, good morning. Welcome in. We are the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Your SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Farm Bureau Insurance. Bundle your auto and home and save with your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent. Go local, go with the home team, and we are excited that it's SEC Tournament Week. It's the best league in the history of college basketball, and that's according to Jay Billis, who's an ACC guy. I don't know what in the hell Danny Cannell's doing out on Twitter trying to lobby for the ACC, but it's embarrassing as usual. But I guess Cannell, he's got his team. It's funny, his alma mater wants to leave the ACC, but he's out there waving the ACC flag, talking about how Duke is clearly the number one team. And then you look at Quad 1 wins, and you're like, Danny, what are you looking at, buddy? So we wanted to welcome in SEC basketball insider Blake Lovell, and he joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, host at 16 Southeastern. And this guy's all over college hoops. He's a machine on Twitter. Blake, good morning. How are you, buddy?
Hey, doing well. Good to talk to you.
You already in Bridgestone Arena getting your ankles taped?
I'm getting camping out already, right? I'm the only one, but hey, I'm here, right?
All right, so who's your team?
Just being in Nashville, right? It's just, I've been here for forever, and so it's just like, being around Tennessee and Vanderbilt and all that, and having covered the league for a while, I feel like those are the fan bases I know the most. Family grew up big Vanderbilt fans.
Okay.
So that's kind of always been in the family. So,
can you believe that we're here with the teams in the league? I know you heard what Jay Billis said a month ago, and we all knew it. But, he's one of the dudes in college basketball. He was on, as you know, Krzyzewski's first Final Four team, and kind of the springboard to what they would do from there on out. But even having said all that, can you believe the depth as far as the talent on the floor and the talent in the coaching ranks in the SEC today?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, isn't it? Just kind of look at, we knew that, years ago, the late Mike Sly was, putting obviously more emphasis on trying to be better. And then, I think Greg Sankey's carried that over. And I think the league office has done a good job of setting the SEC up for success. But, as you know, it comes down to, do you have the coaches, do you have the players? And, really, that's what's happened. Just see kind of this era, I feel like, where, with certainly with NIL, the transfers, everything like that. It's a situation where the SEC is set up for success. It's just a matter of do you execute it to the point to where you can have that success. And I think, again, when you look at all the numbers this year, there's just no doubt. We've never seen a conference do what the SEC did, not just in non-conference play this year, but now, going throughout conference play, getting ready for the tournament. We've not seen a lot of teams like this in one conference. And so, it's become the best league in the country, and I think at this point, everybody's got to be asking themselves, how do you carry that over? And you know what that means too. Just from the football standpoint, once you have this kind of success, everybody is going to be saying, all right, well, why can't we do that? And then, at that point, you're going to see a lot more pressure put, I think, on coaches, and you have to put these rosters together to keep this thing going.
That's a great point. They already anteed up last year and the year before, but with the success this year, I can't imagine what the going rate's going to be, especially for the top 4 to 6 teams in the league. So having said that, is Auburn your clear-cut favorite as far as not just this week, but the team in the league? Or do you have another one that's played really well, that's trending, and you think that they're going to be even better than Auburn in March?
Yeah, listen, Auburn, unquestioned. There's just no doubt that Auburn has the best body of work throughout this entire season. No question about it. But it's like you have a team that's 27-4, and they've lost 2 games in a row. So it's like, we were like, okay, should we just completely panic? Should we overreact to that? I don't think so. I think, again, they were playing 2 teams that needed those games for different reasons. Auburn already locked up the regular season title and locked up a number 1 overall, or maybe a number 1 overall seed. I think they should be. I don't think Duke should be the number 1 overall seed no matter what they do in the ACC tournament. But I think, though, if you're saying, right now, who's the team that's playing the best? Well, to me, I think it's Florida. And I think, again, if you're looking at a team that you feel like is trending in that kind of direction to where you're just like, all right, give me one team right this second, it's hard not to pick Florida because, again, we've seen them beat Auburn for starters. Yes, they had that wild game a couple weeks ago where they got down 26 in the first half at Georgia. But really, other than that, I mean, look at what they've done. And I know people point at the quad one difference and all that. And sure, I mean, they haven't played the same amount of quad one games and all that kind of stuff, but they're a top 10 offensive team, top 10 defensive team. And when you look at all the things they do well, they've got a 9-man rotation to me that I'm just like, give me those 9 against anybody in the country, Duke included. I don't care. I think they're good enough to beat anybody. And so it may be hard not to pick Florida right now, even though, like I said, if you're looking at it based on this entire season, sure, there's no question that Auburn has achieved sort of unprecedented things, but I think Florida may be the team to beat right now.
Do you think the committee will focus on quad one, or is it something else? Like, what do you think the number one thing is that the committee will look at?
Well, I'll tell you that the combination of things, I think, is what's going to really help the SEC specifically this year, and what I think will wind up helping Auburn in getting that number one overall seed. It's the fact that not only do you have a lot of these quad one wins, right? I mean, Auburn has 16. The next closest, Michigan State, has 12. Alabama, 11. Kentucky, 10. Tennessee, 10, and so forth. Florida's got 9. What the SEC managed to accomplish, we talked a minute ago about the non-conference. It wasn't just that they went 185 and 23, whatever the number wound up being. They didn't have any of those bad losses except for one, and that was the opening night of the season. South Carolina lost at home to North Florida. No other loss that any SEC team had taken in non-conference play was considered a bad loss. And then guess what? So no one took a bad loss in conference play either. Now, we could say from an eye test standpoint, all right, hey, Arkansas getting down 35 at South Carolina the other day, well, that's not great. But if you're just looking at it within the full body of work, right, that's not a bad loss this year. Whereas, in previous years, you lose to the bottom team in the SEC, well, they're probably 150 or 200 or something like that in all these, metrics and net rankings and everything. Okay, South Carolina's in the top 90. And so I think from that standpoint, that's what's going to work for the SEC when it comes to the committee, is that anytime you have a situation where you have, let's say, a bad loss, you can make up for it with a great win. And what the SEC has managed to do is that they don't really have any bad losses, and they got a lot of great wins. So to me, you stack that on top of each other. I just think, the SEC teams, I'm not just saying this as the SEC guy, anybody that has the sort of resume that these teams have, they should be getting the benefit of the doubt over the ACC teams, Mountain West teams and all this, because I just think, how can you necessarily just knock these teams when they played in what is, again, as we said earlier, a historical conference based on, achievements this year?
Yeah. Were you surprised, Billis? We're visiting with Blake Lovell, SEC basketball insider. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. We're talking SEC hoops. Unprecedented what has happened this year, and kind of where we're going with SEC basketball. Follow Blake on Twitter. A great follow as far as hoops at the Blake Lovell, and he joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Were you surprised Billis came out and said what he said when he did it?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. We were kind of saying those things probably a week or two before, in that we're saying, listen, if we project ahead and you're starting to wonder, okay, what's this going to look like? If you were seeing sort of the numbers sitting there like, all right, well, this really has a chance to be sitting there with the SEC saying these kind of things. Because, you could have looked at the Ken Pom numbers and all that, the ACC. It's the first year, Ken Pom came into effect and all that. It was 96, 97. The ACC, that was kind of the conference that everybody had been chasing in terms of that overall, net rank or net rating, however Ken Pom does all the advanced metrics. I'm not the best at that. But, when you look at it from that standpoint, the SEC has sort of lapped them almost by a full point, which is a lot when you consider these kind of things. And so from that, I mean, again, it always seemed like, when you were seeing the way this set up, and that's why I think I always go back to, sometimes we do this where we only focus on what's happening now, right? It's the recency bias. But, kind of as we talked about, you could have looked at this after the non-conference and said, there's no way that this is not going to wind up being the best conference ever when you look at it from a strength standpoint, because all these teams are just going to play each other now. It really goes back to what they did in the non-conference. And again, that's where I'm like 185-23. Like, look at anybody else out there. And it's also why I know everybody thinks I'm just dogging on the ACC this year, but the ACC,
it's okay. Go ahead. You have the floor. You can.
Yes, I feel like you would be okay with that, and many others probably here. But it's historically bad. Like, the SEC is historically great. The ACC is historically bad this year. And so there is no argument you can make. Like I said, even if you're an ACC guy, right? And that's like, yes, Jay Billis is a Duke guy, but there is not a single argument you can make that the ACC is anywhere close within the same stratosphere as the SEC in basketball right now. And you know what, too, I think is interesting about this, and this ties into the SEC conversation. But if you saw out there, it was either last week or the week before, a lot of these ACC schools who had bad seasons, decided to make the commitment to their coaches and say, we're bringing these guys back. And we know why that is, because you're going to see this a lot more, I think, now, where even if you're the ACC and you're like, hey, this conference, something's got to change, you're going to see these schools bring a lot of these coaches back because there's a lot of money invested. But it's also trying to say, all right, we're going to give you another shot because we think we can pump the money into this thing that can make it work, right? We're going to give you all the resources. We're really going to commit to it this year and all that. Well, guess what? They should have thought about that years ago, because that's what the SEC has done. They knew early on, you have to put something into this if you're going to get it out of it the way that they have this year, and they're reaping the benefits of it now, whereas a lot of these other conferences are almost feeling like they're trying to catch up. Not a lot of others. Big Ten's doing fine. Big 12's doing fine.
Right.
But I do think from an ACC standpoint, right, look yesterday, Kevin Keats, NC State, got into the Final Four last year. His statement he released yesterday, it was something about when the school commits to invest the resources, it's going to be a great program. And so that just shows you.
What do you think the going rate is or will be for this next cycle?
Oh boy. You're asking the wrong guy on that. Like $7+ million
numbers.
I mean, probably.
Okay.
I think that's probably about right.
Okay.
I mean, just because, again, right, we know the numbers and how ridiculous they are out there right now. And so I would guess it's probably something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Blake Lovell, straight out of Nashville. He's our SEC basketball tournament correspondent too. Great on Twitter, covering the league. Loves it, knows what's going on. And the ACC has one team in the top 21 in the NCAA net rankings. One team.
Yeah.
And the SEC has 4 in the top 6. So I don't know what Danny Cannell's taking, but somebody needs to watch him this week, and especially on Sunday when Selection Sunday rolls out. We're here in Mississippi, and Ole Miss and Mississippi State had good years, but overshadowed because there's so much star power in the league. Ole Miss finishes 8th, Mississippi State finishes 10th. They're going to the tournament. Blake, I still believe that they're dangerous, and if they get the right draw, they could win a game or two, or maybe really get hot in the NCAA tournament. When you look at what Jans and Beard have done, what do you see?
Yeah, I agree with you, and we feel like sometimes we say that in the SEC, where it's like, well, just let these teams get away from each other, and they're going to be okay. But it's like that has to apply this year, right? Because we talked about the strength of the league. I think you are going to see some of these teams like this, where we've seen them hit some rough patches down the stretch, and you're like, okay, well, do we need to completely rethink our idea of what they can be? I don't know about that just yet, because I do feel like they both have different sort of approaches that can help them be successful, right? The one thing I feel like I've talked about with Ole Miss all season long is that, for starters, they're one of the most experienced teams in the country. We know what experience is doing for teams in the NCAA tournament, at least the past couple of years. They don't beat themselves. They're great at not turning the ball over, and they're great at turning over the other team. And I think when you look at some of those teams that have that kind of success, you got old guards that take care of the ball, and they're able to turn defense into offense. That's a lot of what Ole Miss does. And I think from that standpoint, that gives them an opportunity to be very successful. I mean, we're talking about a top 30 team offensively and defensively. And yes, they have 10 losses, but again, we have to put it within the context of where those losses came and who they came to. And I think they're going to be, one that I mean, I was saying probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, I'm like, hey, don't be surprised if Ole Miss is kind of one of those teams that winds up in the Elite Eight because they have sort of the makeup of the teams that can do that just with all those things I just mentioned. And Mississippi State, I mean, I said to someone last week, they're probably the most confusing team in the SEC just because, man, you see how good they can be, and then you see some of those stretches where they just are really struggling. And, I mean, I feel like that Arkansas game was the perfect example where, all right, looks like you're going to lose, you make the valiant comeback, then, wind up losing. Like, just lots of sort of roller coaster type emotions, I feel like, with this team over the past little bit. But, listen, anytime you have a player like Josh Hubbard, anytime you have what I think is still one of the most underrated coaches in the country, Chris Jans, I think that they're going to be in a position where it's all about the draw. We always say the matchups matter. I think for Mississippi State, maybe more so than Ole Miss, I think the matchup matters because what we know they're not great at is shooting the ball. And surprisingly, one of the most shocking stats in the SEC this year for me is how bad Mississippi State has been in defending the three. They're allowing teams shoot 37%. That's 332nd, I think, nationally. And so they got to figure some of those. Yeah, they got to figure some of those things out because guess what? You go out and get one of these, mid-major type teams you play in the first round or something like that, who just runs their offense and shoots 25 threes a game. I don't like that setup necessarily for the Bulldogs.
I agree. All right, give me a team that we're not talking about in the league. You mentioned, Florida's been up there, and I agree with you. They're trending the right way and look like they're hitting on all cylinders, going 9 deep and all that. But outside of that top four, give me a team that you really like that if you disappeared and came back Saturday of the Final Four weekend in San Antonio and someone said, Blake, this team made the Final Four, you'd be like, I am not surprised at all.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? This is going to be the team I'm going to name because in any other year, we'd have been like, all right, well, that was the expectation, wasn't it? I mean, it's Kentucky. Yeah. I think, Kentucky is absolutely the team this year where there was no one, not just in the SEC, but probably nationally, that dealt with the injury situations that Kentucky's dealt with the entire season. And yet somehow they've been able to keep it together, win so many big games. I mean, I mentioned the quad one wins earlier. I mean, Kentucky is tied for fourth with 10 now. And they played, not just that, they played 19 of them. I think that's second behind Auburn in terms of actual, total of quad one games they played this year. We have seen them time and time again rise to the occasion in these big games. They love these big games. And yes, they lost, that home one to Auburn and all that. But, for the most part, they played so well. I mean, who else has beaten Duke, Gonzaga, Louisville, Florida, Texas A&M, Tennessee twice, right? They won at Missouri the other day. They have just got so many good wins. And I think from that standpoint, to me, I'm not going to say it's an exact comparison. There are a lot of things I think that are similar about this Kentucky team and that Alabama team that made the Final Four run last year. Elite offensive team. Yes, there's a little bit to be desired on the defensive end sometimes. But, Kentucky, I think, was ranked, I want to say it was 115th or something like that in defense a month or so ago. Now they're up to in top 50 defensive team in the country. And so they've gotten a lot better on that end of the floor. And I think Mark Pope's done a fantastic job. I think when you looked at the roster coming into the season, I don't know, it didn't look like a top, team type roster. I mean, I think we picked them 8th or something like that, which made I thought was about right. And, that's kind of looking at a scenario now where if they go win the SEC tournament this week, I wouldn't be shocked. If they make the Final Four, I wouldn't be shocked because look how many great wins they have. And I feel like people are going to be a little down on them just from the record standpoint. But now they're about as healthy as they've been all season. And so I think that's going to mean something heading into these tournaments.
He is Blake Lovell on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line, SEC Basketball Insider. He's in Nashville. He's hanging out with us on 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. This is the Out of Bounds Show. All right, one more, Blake. Cal and the Hogs. They, as he said, everybody put them in the coffin, but didn't put the nails in. Are they going to make it in?
I think they're going to make it in. I think that win against Mississippi State put them in. You don't want to be in a scenario where you lose to South Carolina again, because having those two losses, in a span of 11 days would not be ideal. But I think right now they're in. And, sometimes we say too, keep in mind, you don't know what the committee's going to value when it comes to the SEC tournament. We've seen it so many times over the years where we look up and we're like, man, that should have really improved that team seeding by a line or two, and it does nothing. And so I think, though, for the bubble teams, it's got to matter. you don't want to be sitting there with potential bid stealers out there this week. So you don't want to do that with a loss. But I think if they win this game against South Carolina on Wednesday, I don't think there's any way possible you can keep them out.
And that's a dangerous team. They got players.
It is. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? We saw what South Carolina did to them, a couple weeks ago or whatever, and it's just like, I don't know. Arkansas is playing very well right now, and these are the kind of games, like I said, it's not as bad of a loss as it would be any other year, even if you were to lose this one, but I think right now you don't want to give the committee anything to work with when it comes to trying to find a way to maybe put, a North Carolina or somebody like that in ahead of these. So.
I've got 1 minute. What about your Vanderbilt Commodores?
Hey, listen, the Commodores, you said earlier, I might not go Final Four with them, but I think they're a team too, and I know they've lost back-to-back games. They are one of the best in the SEC at running their offense, and I think that could matter when you get into some of these half-court type games if you get the right matchup in the NCAA tournament, which they are absolutely in. I think they're going to stay out of Dayton. So if the Commodores, let's say, are in that 10 slot, I don't know if they want to be in that 8-9 game for all the obvious reasons, but if they wind up as a 10, you can see them beating a 7, have a chance to beat a 2. I wouldn't be surprised. Mark Bankston's done a great job. Any other year, if he didn't have what Bruce Pearl and Todd Golden, guys like that have done, he'd probably be easily your coach of the year. But yeah, he's done a really good job, and I think they're one to keep an eye on.
All right, Blake, that was great, man. Love following you on Twitter. Have a great week in Nashville. It's going to be awesome.
Appreciate it, both. Thank you.
Blake Lovell on the Out of Bounds Show, host of at 16 Southeastern, SEC Basketball Insider. He was our correspondent. He was at Bridgestone Arena right there. Okay, I may be exaggerating or embellishing that, but he's in Nashville, and he's awesome on Twitter following the SEC. He likes the way Florida, and they've been playing great, is looking. Auburn lost a heartbreaker to Alabama. That was a wild game. And Mississippi State crushing loss on Saturday. And I think he made a great point about you get into these half-court games, and how do you run your offensive sets? And that doesn't bode well for Mississippi State. Yet they're capable of winning games. But who's going to help Hubbard? You just give the slight edge to some of these other teams as far as what they run half-court set-wise. And good hell, that's a bad shooting team and defending the three. And yet here they are. They're going to the tournament. You tell me. The Out of Bounds Show is brought to you by Farm Bureau Insurance. Bundle your auto and home and save with your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent. As Jake Mangum says, go local. Go with the home team. Hour number 2 coming up. Oh, we got another guest out of Lexington, Kentucky, coming up at 8:30.